My name is Lisa. I am 26 years old. I have 2 children, aged 4 and 3, who go to daycare. Currently, I am working part-time at my uncle's company until my children grow up. My husband, who recently got promoted to supervisor at the supermarket where he works, is 32 years old. When he received the promotion, he was quietly happy, saying with a smile during dinner, "It somehow reminds me of when I received my first job offer." Our children, even though they didn't understand what was happening, seemed pleased to see their parents having a cheerful conversation. It felt like our family time was filled with happiness. Today, the promotion was officially announced, so I treated myself a little and bought some higher quality meat than my husband prefers to celebrate. I prepared a delicious meal while waiting for him to come home. However, when he arrived, his facial expression seemed different. I went to the door with our kids as usual and said, "Welcome home." But he didn't respond with his usual, "I'm home," and a smile. Our kids and I were confused, but I thought he might be tired, so I casually informed him that dinner was ready. While I was setting the table, my husband, who normally changes clothes, and cheerfully comes straight to the dining table asking, "What's for dinner tonight?" sat at the table with a serious expression. And then, looking at the food laid out on the table, he said, "Hey you, is this meant to be my celebratory meal?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That's because he has never, I was previously referred to as you. Our children were unsure how to react to this unfamiliar version of their father and became silent. Sensing the atmosphere deteriorate, my spouse continued to express sentiments such as, "You fail to comprehend how remarkable I am. I exerted great effort to attain the position of supervisor. Do you grasp that?" Seemingly displeased with what he perceived as a lack of respect from me, I did not want the celebration to sour. Moreover, I wanted our children to remain calm, so I attempted to appease my husband. "I apologize. Thank you for consistently working diligently for our benefit. We genuinely appreciate it," I assured him. He appeared somewhat improved upon hearing my words, so throughout the meal, I endeavored to interject expressions of gratitude and appreciation into our conversation. However, he persisted in stating things like, "This meal fails to suffice for my celebration." I felt disheartened because I had indulged in expensive meat that we do not typically purchase and prepared dishes that my husband enjoys, believing it would bring him happiness. Yet, if he deems the meal modest, then evidently I have not met his expectations. I ruminated on this thought and made an effort to calm myself. I surmised that his peculiar behavior may be attributed to exhaustion from his first day as a supervisor, and hoped that he would return to his usual self the following day. After the meal, I commenced cleaning up, relieved to see my husband engaging in conversation with our children on the couch as per usual. Normally, I can hear the 3 of them laughing, but it was exceptionally quiet. Intrigued, I halted my tasks and listened attentively to their discussion. I was astonished by what they were saying. We were discussing, "If you aspire to resemble father, you must dedicate yourself to studying extensively. You will encounter difficulties in the future if you turn out like mother, who neglects her studies," he uttered. Consequently, I swiftly intervened and halted the conversation. "What kind of remark is that to make towards the children?" I interrogated him. However, he retorted angrily, "It is not incorrect. What is objectionable about it?" We had never engaged in a dispute before, so I found myself at a loss for words. When I remained silent, he sneered and declared, "Observe, you are incapable of responding, aren't you? You would be unable to survive without me, wouldn't you?" I inquired of him, "What has come over you today? Your behavior is peculiar. You are not accustomed to uttering such things, are you?" Yet my spouse merely retorted, "I am merely expressing my long-held thoughts. I detest the fact that you believe you are on equal footing with me." He conveyed the notion that the individual I knew until yesterday was not his authentic self, but rather a facade he had been projecting. It was only then that I realized the individual standing before me was my husband's true essence. I was overcome with an emotion I had never experienced before, a combination of apprehension, sorrow, and frustration at this astounding reality. At that precise moment, our eldest son, who is 4 years old, addressed me, "Mother also works diligently." Who is more awe-inspiring, your part-time employed mother or your father, the high-ranking executive at his corporation? My husband scorned our son's silence, stating, "Can't you comprehend, even at the tender age of 4? You must have inherited your mother's intellect as well as her appearance." Believing he was being reprimanded, the young boy gazed downwards, his eyes welling up with tears. To divert the attention of the children from the situation, I suggested cheerfully, "Shall we have a bath together?" Normally, it was my spouse who bathed the kids, but they were excited to have a bath with me instead. Our oldest son, who usually insisted on my assistance in undressing, quickly started removing his clothes independently. Our 3-year-old daughter followed suit, doing her best to undress herself. After giving her a little help, she managed to take off her clothes, and I praised her with a smile, saying, "Well done." She appeared very pleased with herself. Observing the children in this manner was so comforting that I almost forgot about the earlier incident. While we were in the bathtub, discussing what had happened at daycare, my spouse entered the changing room and shouted through the bathroom door, "You're being too loud. And why are you bathing before me?" The children clung to me in fear. As my spouse grumbled his way back to the living room, our son expressed concern, saying, "Daddy is being mean today." I embraced my daughter, who seemed on the verge of tears, and reassured her, "Daddy is just tired and irritable today. He will be his usual self tomorrow." After we finished bathing and prepared for bedtime, we went to the children's bedroom earlier than usual. We spoke in hushed tones so as not to provoke my spouse. The children seemed to find this amusing. "It's like we're having a secret conversation," they remarked, speaking more than usual in their soft whispers. They even attempted to suppress their giggles. Their laughter, possibly fearing that my spouse might become angry. However, the more they attempted to stifle their laughter, the more they appeared to desire it, and they spent the entire duration conversing and laughing joyfully. Observing the children in this manner, I experienced genuine happiness. After laughing themselves into exhaustion, the children drifted off to sleep earlier than usual. I then made my way to the living room where my spouse was. My spouse was engrossed in his smartphone, his hand concealing his mouth, his face slightly flushed as if he were embarrassed. I felt a bit unsettled, but more importantly, we needed to address my spouse's earlier behavior. "You've been acting very peculiar today," I informed him. "Even the children are becoming concerned." He retorted, "What's so strange about me? If anything, you're the odd one. Shouldn't I be respected by our children? Do you want them to turn out like you?" He displayed no remorse whatsoever, even going so far as to belittle me. I told him I have not led a life that warrants being looked down upon. But he continued to insist, "Your way of thinking is incorrect," and we were unable to have a proper conversation. Then he declared, "We will be doing things my way from now on. I am going to rectify our family's misguided ways." When I inquired about his intentions, he proposed that the family should always prioritize him, take a step back, and create an environment where he can unwind. I pleaded with him, "That is too different from how we have been doing things. The children will be bewildered. Please stop." However, it appears that he heard about the domestic life of a department, the man he respects, and believes that my and the children's attitudes towards him at home were incorrect. It appears he received some words of encouragement from the head of the department when he was promoted and had a brief conversation. During that discussion, the department head stated, "The reason I was able to become a department head slightly earlier than my colleagues is thanks to my spouse." So my spouse inquired about the department head's spouse and family. The spouse of the department heads does not allow him to do anything, enabling him to solely focus on his work. This has remained unchanged even after their child was born, and she efficiently manages all household chores and childcare. Their child apparently aspires to be just like their father as well. Upon hearing this, my spouse seemed to believe that the reason for his promotion coming later than his colleagues was my fault. He now believes that if he can make our family resemble the department head's family, he can catch up with his colleagues and get promoted earlier. I did not vocalize it, but I personally thought that it was not my fault, but rather that his work was not being appreciated. I suddenly felt so exhausted. As I was heading to the bedroom to sleep, my spouse stopped me. Since I was promoted, I have been admired more than ever by the part-time workers and temporary employees, he stated, with a slight blush on his face. Then he said, "You should be more appreciative that you have such a popular man as your spouse." Misinterpreting the fact that people were praising him falsely signifies he is well-liked. I had reservations about his words, but I was too tired, so I simply nodded and went to the children's room. I climbed into the children's bed and decided to sleep there. The following morning, I was disappointed to discover that yesterday was not a figment of my imagination. When our son casually greeted my husband with a good morning, he suddenly shouted, "It's good morning, sir, to your father." Startled and frightened, our daughter burst into tears while our son, holding back his own tears, stammered, "Gee, good morning, sir." Witnessing this, I shouted, "Don't scold them for greeting you as they always do." But my husband yelled back at me, "Didn't you comprehend what I said yesterday? You should be grateful just to be with someone like me." He continued his tirade. In front of the children, our eldest son, who had been suppressing his tears, as he had never witnessed such an argument before, also began crying. Unable to contain my emotions, I joined them in shedding tears, a mix of anger and sadness overwhelming me. Observing this, my husband exclaimed, "What a gloomy start to the morning," and left for work without having breakfast. As I comforted the weeping children, our eldest son gently caressed my head and said, "Don't cry, Mom." Wiping away my tears, I embraced the children tightly and reassured them with a smile, "I won't cry anymore." Then I prepared for my work and got the kids ready for daycare before heading out. When I was with the children, I could put on a cheerful facade, but when I was alone, I felt incredibly despondent. I couldn't help but to ponder on how to mend our family. In order to restore its previous state of joy, the consulting firm where I am employed is managed by my maternal uncle. My uncle happens to be the brother of my mother. Since he and his spouse never had any children of their own, they have always showered me with affection since I was a child, acting as a second set of parents. Following his recommendation, I obtained the necessary certification to work as an HR consultant, and now I am employed at his company. After giving birth to my children, they have graciously allowed me to work shorter hours. While my uncle oversees the operations of the consulting firm, my aunt manages a real estate agency. The apartment we reside in is rented from her real estate company. Upon arriving at work, my uncle noticed the tear stains on my face and expressed his concern. I shrugged it off with a smile, stating that I couldn't help but shed tears when I bid farewell to my children at daycare. However, I believe my uncle saw through my facade. Kindly, he told me not to hesitate to reach out to him if I needed anything, while patting my head. Once again, I held back my tears and proceeded with my work. After completing my work at 3 p.m., I said goodbye to my colleagues who were still working and went to pick up my children from daycare. We then made our way to the grocery store to buy groceries. Interestingly, the supermarket is also where my husband is employed. I am acquainted with the staff, so I exchange greetings with them as I shop. A part-time employee who often engages in conversation with me congratulated my husband on his promotion to supervisor. I expressed my gratitude, acknowledging that it was all thanks to everyone's support. Usually, this part-time worker would initiate further conversation, but on this occasion, we both remained silent. Casual conversation, but today she approached me with a solemn expression. Just as she was about to speak, my spouse, who coincidentally was in the store, caught her attention, and she swiftly returned to her responsibilities. My spouse advised me not to meddle in the affairs of part-time workers and instructed me to finish our shopping and return home. Considering that I might have indeed disrupted her work, I simply responded with an affirmation and proceeded to shop, holding our child's hand. After completing our shopping and waiting in line for checkout, I noticed my spouse engaged in what appeared to be an excessively close conversation with a young female part-timer. I dismissed it and continued with the checkout process when my daughter approached my spouse and the part-timer. My spouse dismissed her with a casual gesture. She returned to me with a crestfallen expression. As I observed my spouse, they and the part-timer disappeared into the back of the store through a door. My intuition as a woman kicked in, and I had an unsettling feeling. But more importantly, my mind was consumed with the question of how to restore my family's previous state of happiness. After completing the shopping, I arrived home, allowed the children to play, and contemplated while preparing dinner, but no viable solutions came to mind. I pondered seeking advice from my uncle, but I ultimately decided to reflect further on the matter since it pertained to my own family. I reassured myself that there must be a way to resolve this situation. By the usual dinner time, I had prepared the meal. Upon my husband's arrival, I patiently awaited his return, but he did not come home. I hesitated to call him, fearing that I would receive a scolding, so I patiently awaited his arrival without reaching out. I proceeded to have dinner with the children, then we all took a bath together. Finally, after putting the kids to bed in their room, my husband arrived home. His typical work hours are from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., and the store closes at 8 p.m. I wondered if he had to work overtime. Instead of asking, I refrained and simply reheated dinner. However, my husband informed me, "I don't need dinner today, I've already eaten." Silently, I turned off the stove and cleaned up. As I glanced at my husband, I noticed he was engrossed in exchanging messages on his smartphone. He caught my gaze and began making excuses, even though I hadn't questioned him, stating that listening to employees' concerns is part of his supervisory role. In that moment, my intuition as a woman led me closer to the truth. Something seemed amiss, I pondered. It felt as though my husband was no longer the man I once adored, and a wave of sadness washed over me. My heart throbbed with pain, my pulse quickened, and I felt a sense of suffocation. Restoring my once happy family seemed impossible alone, as my suspicions of my husband's potential infidelity grew stronger. The prospect of rebuilding the joyful family appeared to be slipping away. My legs trembled uncontrollably. With that, I bid my husband goodnight and decided to sleep in the children's bedroom once again. However, sleep eluded me and morning arrived. The children recalled the events of the previous morning and remarked, "Greetings." Respectfully addressing their father, I bid farewell to my spouse as they departed for work after our morning meal, wishing them a pleasant day. Throughout a restless night, my thoughts were consumed by the desire to restore harmony within my family. In order to achieve this, I concluded that it was necessary to rekindle my husband's affection towards our household. As a result, I made the decision to dedicate more time to honing my culinary skills and exerting greater effort in domestic chores, with the hope of regaining his sentiments. However, my husband began arriving home late almost every day and ceased partaking in meals at our abode. Recognizing that it was not prudent to confront him at that moment, I refrained from discussing the matter with him. No, perhaps I was apprehensive about discovering that my husband's affections were no longer directed towards me, and I may have been unwilling to hear any harsh words from him. Consequently, I started avoiding conversations as much as possible. One day, while I was sleeping in the children's bedroom as usual, I overheard a conversation taking place in the living room, seemingly involving my husband and another individual. Despite acknowledging that eavesdropping is ill-mannered, I discreetly approached the living room door and listened to their exchange through the closed door. "It's all right, Mary. She won't discover anything." "My wife is completely unaware," my husband uttered. It became evident to me that the woman occupying my husband's thoughts was Mary. "I truly love you, Mary," he confessed. Remaining remarkably composed, as if I had resigned myself to the notion of reclaiming my husband's affections, I abruptly swung open the door and confronted him. "What do you signify by renounce your family? Are you implying that you will forsake not only me, but also our children?" I shouted at him. My spouse swiftly ended the call, his countenance slightly flustered, but in the next moment, he adopted a defiant stance. "It would be challenging for you to handle 2 kids if we were to divorce, so just silently acknowledge that I am seeing someone else." He uttered, "What are you uttering? There is no way I can embrace that. It is not a parent's role to discuss abandoning their children." I could no longer contain myself, even though I was concerned about waking up the children. I couldn't remain composed, and my voice escalated towards my husband. My husband, who had never witnessed me argue back so vehemently, was taken aback, but he took a deep breath and retorted, "Who do you think you are, working part-time? If you resent it so much, stop depending on me. Do not you dare defy me." The next moment, our eldest son approached my husband and exclaimed, "I detest you. Leave." My husband said to our eldest son, "You all are the ones who should depart." I stood in front of our son and stated, "Do not be so harsh on the kids." I thought our son would burst into tears even more, but he was glaring at my husband with an enraged expression. My husband retrieved an envelope, presumably from the government office, from his bag and handed it to me with a sneer. Inside the envelope was a divorce document. "You all leave. I will give you 2 days. Depart by then." Uttering that, my husband packed his belongings and left in the car. I embraced our eldest son and expressed, "Thank you for defending me." In response, he expressed his dislike for anyone who mistreats our mother and began to weep. Upon entering the bedroom where our son and daughter were, our daughter leaped out of bed, embraced me tightly, and began to tremble as tears streamed down her face. I addressed my children, "Shall we relocate to a place where it's just the 3 of us, without our father?" As I spoke, my own voice quivered with emotion. Without any hesitation, the kids responded, saying that they did not wish to remain in this frightening environment and that they did not need their father. It is possible that their decision as young children may change in the future. However, living with someone who readily declares that he would abandon his own children for the woman he loves will never lead to the happiness of the children. On the contrary, it may cause them both physical and mental harm. I believed that the top priority was to separate the children from their father as soon as possible. Despite the late hour, I made a phone call to my parents and divulged everything that had transpired. My parents urged me to come home immediately, but I declined their offer as it would take 2 hours to travel from my current location. The reason being that I genuinely enjoyed working at my uncle's company, and I believed that a complete change in environment would not be beneficial for the children. Furthermore, they had formed strong bonds with their friends at the daycare center and eagerly anticipated attending each day. Thus, I could not make the immediate choice to return to my parents' house. I sought guidance from my uncle and informed him of my intention to rent an apartment nearby. In my family, there is a real estate business owned by my aunt. Although my parents were concerned about the situation, they decided to visit my uncle and aunt together the next day. When the day arrived, my parents went to my uncle's company and pleaded on my behalf, with my aunt present as well. They assured me that they would arrange for me to rent a room. Since I was busy with work, I asked my parents to handle the preparations for moving and picking up the children from daycare. I informed them that I would be returning late and went to work. After finishing my shift, I went to the supermarket where my husband is employed and informed him that I agreed to proceed with the divorce. I mentioned that I would be going to the county clerk's office to submit the necessary paperwork. At that moment, a part-time worker who seemed to have something to say approached me. She led me to the restroom and finally conveyed her message, which she had wanted to share earlier. Due to certain circumstances, I couldn't reveal this before, but it appears that your husband is pursuing a part-time girl. I inquired if the girl's name was Mary. The part-time worker appeared surprised and asked how I knew. I explained that my husband had already informed me about their relationship. She then mentioned that she would contact this Mary girl and left the restroom. I waited for Mary with mixed emotions. Eventually, Mary, a girl with an adorable face, arrived alone. She informed me that my husband had threatened her by saying, "I will terminate your part-time contract if you don't cooperate with me." He also pressured her into exchanging contact information, to which she reluctantly agreed. After that, she began receiving messages from him at all times. She informed me that he would wait for her near the entrance for employees until her late shift ended every day and would ask her to go to the diner, which was inconvenient for her. What was even more alarming was that on Mary's days off, he would approach her house and instruct her to come outside. She found this situation terrifying, if it was indeed true, and showed me all the message content as proof. I comprehended that Mary's statements were accurate, and I informed her that my spouse had informed me about his involvement with Mary, which was not the reason, but I would be initiating divorce proceedings afterwards. Mary expressed regret for not informing me about this sooner, but I assured her not to worry, as the divorce was inevitable. For some unknown reason, we connected and exchanged contact details, then departed from the restroom. I searched the store for my spouse. However, I was unable to locate him, so I proceeded to the employee entrance and decided to have him paged from the office. My spouse approached me with a smirk and said, "So you've come to your senses. You can't support 2 children on a part-time salary." With no sympathy remaining for my spouse, I responded coldly, "I can't continue like this. Let's get a divorce." He appeared surprised and inquired, "Are you certain? How will you raise the children on your own?" I replied, "You are aware that I work as a social worker, correct? I have a part-time position with reduced hours, but my income surpasses yours. Do not worry." He appeared taken aback. Then I stated, "I am going to file the divorce documents. Farewell," and proceeded to the office of the county clerk. Upon submitting the divorce papers, I experienced an unusual sense of relief, and I eagerly anticipated seeing my children. While walking home, I heard a voice from behind me exclaiming, "Elisa." I turned around to witness the wife of the department heads waving and approaching me. "You appear cheerful. Did something positive occur?" she inquired. "Well, it is a somewhat lengthy tale," I began, and she kindly proposed that we go to a cafe to converse. I had hoped to see my children, but I also believed it would be best to inform her about my divorce. Thus, we ventured to the cafe together. I informed my parents I will be delayed. I have some matters to discuss with the wife of the department heads before settling down at the cafe. I also disclosed to her the details of my divorce and the reasons behind it. She seemed astonished upon hearing this. "Oh, it seems like you have only been presented with an embellished version of the story," she remarked. According to her, the department head is rather inept outside of work. He is so clumsy that even when he attempts to assist with household chores, it only results in more work for her. For example, he would break dishes while washing them due to his hands slipping from the soap. He would hang the laundry without removing the wrinkles, and he nearly caused a fire by overheating the pan while cooking. So she advised him to solely focus on his work. Every time he attempted something, it merely added to her workload. The reality was the head of the department expressed a desire to assist with the household tasks, but she had explicitly forbidden him from doing so. When I inquired if their child held admiration for the department head due to his early career success and subsequent respect, she responded by saying, "That must be the reason. He doesn't have any responsibilities at home. My husband is quite inept outside of work. That's what makes him endearing." A smile of contentment graced her face as she uttered these words. It was then that I realized the department head was not a domineering figure at home, but rather an affectionate husband who willingly followed his wife's lead. They appeared to be a delightful family. I'd also shared my concerns about Mary's situation with my spouse. I discussed Mary with the department head's spouse without obtaining her consent. Considering Mary's well-being, I knew her father held a high-ranking position at the supermarket where my husband was employed. I was certain that her husband, driven by ambitions for promotion, would yield to pressure from higher authorities. The department head's wife acknowledged that if this were true, it would constitute a violation of company policies and necessitate an investigation. Thus, our conversation came to an end. Before parting ways, she reassured me by saying, "You and your children deserve happiness. If anything arises, please inform me." We exchanged contact details. Upon returning home in haste, I discovered that the house was already vacant. We had completed the preparations for our relocation. "Let's proceed to our new residence," he declared. Subsequently, we entered the car and embarked on our journey towards the new house. My aunt's employees had provided assistance, and my mother had made decisions regarding the placement of furniture. After acquiring the furnishings, we were prepared to commence our fresh start immediately. What astonished me even more was the spaciousness of the living area and the abundance of rooms. Each of our children now had their own individual space. Additionally, there was a designated room for my parents to utilize during their visits. I expressed my gratitude to my aunt and uncle for allowing us to rent this place at such a reasonable cost. "You really don't need to pay any rent," my aunt stated, but I was appreciative even for the reduced amount. That evening, we commemorated both the divorce and the relocation with those who had assisted us. A few days later, I received an unpleasant phone call from my former spouse, which I naturally disregarded. I merely read the message he sent via WhatsApp, but chose not to reply. He was taken aback to discover that all the furniture had been removed, leaving only his possessions in the room. He demanded the return of the furniture. The majority of the furniture was something I had purchased when I was single, so I simply brushed off his request. 3 days following that incident, I received a call from the wife of the department head. She informed me that her husband had reprimanded my ex-husband severely. Evidently, he was left in a state of shock, his complexion pale, after being informed that he would live with regret for the remainder of his life, because there was no possibility of turning back. Subsequently, Mary and her parents visited the compliance department at headquarters. They explained the mistreatment Mary had endured from my ex-husband, providing evidence from their WhatsApp conversations and submitting recorded phone calls as new proof. It appeared that this course of action was suggested by the department head's wife to Mary. Following the discovery that the damage report had been submitted to the main office, my former spouse insisted that he was not stalking me, but rather that we were in a romantic relationship. However, he was informed by the individuals at the headquarters that engaging in a romantic affair with a part-time employee while being married was also a violation of compliance. This revelation left him speechless. Subsequently, the representative from the headquarters presented the evidence provided by Mary, and upon realizing the trouble he had caused, the misunderstanding surrounding our relationship, and the absence of any actual connection between us, my ex-husband broke down in tears. Ultimately, he received a dismissal notice from the company and was informed that he would be transferred to the branch in Alaska as a regular employee. Afterward, my former spouse went to inform his in-laws about our divorce and his demotion. The in-laws were furious about the reason for the divorce and the fact that they would no longer have the opportunity to see their grandchildren, resulting in them kicking him out of their house. I received an apology and a report from my in-laws regarding this matter. They also apologized to me and pledged to ensure that he fulfilled his child support obligations appropriately. Every day, my ex-husband sends me messages expressing his desire to start anew. However, I am contemplating blocking him in the near future. My children never mention their father. On the contrary, they appear to be leading content lives, being well taken care of by their aunt and uncle. I have concluded that I am finished with marriage. Moving forward, my priority is safeguarding my children's joy and happiness, expenses,